Tensions are rising as Slovakia responds to Ukraine's decision to stop Russian gas transit. In a controversial move, Prime Minister Robert Fico has threatened to cut vital support for over 130,000 Ukrainian refugees, including housing and financial aid. This conflict brings energy politics head-to-head with humanitarian needs. Is Slovakia protecting its national interests, or has it gone too far? Stay tuned as we break down this escalating crisis.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're diving into a story with some pretty big global implications.
Yeah, we're talking about energy politics, humanitarian aid, and the ongoing war in Ukraine.
You know, it might seem like those things are completely separate.
Right.
But they're all tangled up in this very complicated situation.
All right, so let's try to untangle it.
Let's break it down.
So Ukraine has stopped the flow of Russian natural gas going through its pipelines to Slovakia. They're trying to hit Russia's finances, disrupt their war funding.
Makes sense strategically.
Yeah.
But, well, it's definitely causing some issues.
And Slovakia is feeling those issues, right?
Big time. This decision is costing Slovakia a ton of money.
How much are we talking?
An estimated 500 million euros every year.
500 million. Wow.
Yeah, those are transit fees that Slovakia was really depending on.
So what does that actually mean for Slovakia, like in real terms?
Think of it like this. A small town, and suddenly their main source of income just vanishes. Exactly. That's basically what's happening to Slovakia, but on a national scale. These lost fees are a huge blow to their economy.
Ouch.
And this is where things get really interesting. Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, is now threatening to cut aid to Ukrainian refugees because of this whole gas situation.
He's basically saying, you cut off our gas, we cut off support for your people.
Yeah, basically. Fico has been very public in his criticism of Ukraine's actions. He's calling it economic sabotage, which kind of lines up with his pro-Russia stance.
So he's siding more with Russia on this.
He's definitely leaning that way. He's arguing that Slovakia, with this sudden economic hardship, has to focus on taking care of its own citizens first.
I mean, I can see that perspective. But how many Ukrainian refugees are we talking about here? It can't be a small number.
It's not. Slovakia is currently hosting over 130,000 Ukrainian refugees who fled the war. They rely on the government for housing, food, basic services.
Wow, that's a lot of people who depend on that aid.
It is, and these are individuals and families that have already been through so much.
Yeah.
Cutting off their support could push them into even more vulnerable situations, potentially leading to homelessness and a full-blown humanitarian crisis right there in Slovakia.
It sounds like Fico is playing a risky game, using these refugees as leverage.
Yeah, it's a dangerous move.
But why is Slovakia siding with Russia? Have they not seen what's happening in Ukraine?
Well, Fico's stance on the whole war has been pretty controversial. He's known for being pro-Russia, and he's criticized NATO's involvement in the conflict. Some people see his reaction to the gas cutoff as him trying to appease Russia, ignoring what the refugees are going through.
Okay, so Slovakia is in a tough spot. They've got a pro-Russia prime minister threatening to cut aid to over 130,000 Ukrainian refugees because their gas revenue's gone. What's the logic behind cutting the aid, though?
Well, Fico's saying that with such a huge economic hit, Slovakia has to prioritize taking care of its own citizens. He's making it sound like a matter of survival, like they can't afford to keep supporting refugees at the same level with this financial burden.
It's a lot of money, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But are there other ways to handle this, to deal with the financial shortfall without making such extreme cuts?
That's the big question. His critics say he's using the refugee crisis as a scapegoat, deflecting from maybe his government's own policy issues or how they've managed funds. They're pointing out that Slovakia itself isn't actually short on gas. They're just losing the money they made by letting Russian gas pass through on the way to other countries.
Right, so it's not like Slovakian citizens are going without gas. They just lost the income from those pipelines.
Exactly. And that's an important distinction. It makes you wonder if Fico's reaction is really about the economy or if it's more about politics and aligning himself with Russia.
So what exactly is he planning to cut?
He's talking about slashing housing subsidies,
Okay.
which would make it almost impossible for a lot of refugees to pay rent. He's also suggesting limiting their access to public services, things like healthcare and education. It would make it much harder for these refugees to build a stable life in Slovakia.
This is messy. So many people are going to be hurt by this. How does the Ukrainian government feel about all of this? I'm guessing they aren't thrilled.
Yeah, they're definitely not happy. Zelensky, Ukraine's president, has condemned Fico's threats. He's accusing him of siding with Russia and using these vulnerable refugees as political pawns. His argument is that stopping the gas transit was a necessary strategic move to weaken Russia's war effort, not an attack on Slovakia.
And morally, is it right for Slovakia to just abandon these refugees because they're losing money?
That's the big ethical question, isn't it? It brings up serious concerns about international responsibility, how we treat refugees during conflicts. Is it okay to cut off support to people fleeing a war just because it's become inconvenient economically?
Let's talk more about those ethical issues. I want to really understand what could happen to these refugees if these cuts go through.
Absolutely. The potential consequences are pretty alarming. We'll get into those in more detail soon. But what stands out to you so far?
Honestly, it's just the sheer number of people at risk. Over 130,000 refugees, each with their own story, facing this uncertain future because of these political games. And it's hard to grasp, Slovakia benefiting from its relationship with Russia and now turning their back on the people fleeing the war that Russia is waging.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It shows how complex these relationships are, all the competing interests. It feels like a humanitarian crisis is brewing in Slovakia, and whatever happens is going to have an impact far beyond their borders.
Yeah, it's a truly troubling situation. The potential consequences for these refugees are just dire. We're talking about families, many with young children. They've already lost so much.
Hard to even imagine.
They fled their homes, jobs, their entire lives.
Right.
All seeking safety and a chance to rebuild their lives.
Yeah.
And now they're facing losing the little stability they've managed to find in Slovakia.
It's got to be incredibly tough on them emotionally, too. They escaped the horrors of war, and now they're caught in this political battle. Exactly. The trauma they've experienced, it's unimaginable. And now, instead of receiving compassion and support, they're being used as bargaining chips. It's a complete disregard for their basic human dignity, their rights.
So we talked about the possibility of homelessness. But what other challenges might these refugees face if Slovakia goes ahead with these cuts?
Well, the impact would be in many different ways. Without those housing subsidies, a lot of families are going to struggle to pay rent, and they could end up in overcrowded or unsafe living conditions.
Oh, that's awful.
And if their access to healthcare is limited, that means delayed or completely missed medical treatments, putting their health at risk, especially for those with chronic illnesses or pregnant women.
And their kids.
Children might be denied access to education, jeopardizing their future.
It's just one negative consequence after another, and it makes these families even more vulnerable. I can't believe that Slovakia, a member of the EU, would even consider doing this. What's the international community saying?
Human rights organizations are really worried. They're warning about a potential humanitarian catastrophe happening in Slovakia.
A catastrophe.
Wow. The UN Refugee Agency has urged the Slovakian government to reconsider, emphasizing their legal and moral obligations to protect refugees.
So there's a lot of pressure on Fico to back down.
Yeah, there is. But so far, he's remained defiant. He keeps saying that Slovakia can't handle the financial burden of supporting the refugees while their economy is suffering.
Right, right.
He's framing it as a choice between Slovak citizens and Ukrainian refugees, which is pretty dangerous and divisive rhetoric, and it just fuels tensions even more.
It's like he's ignoring the fact that Slovakia is not actually short on gas. It's all about the money they're losing from those transit fees.
That's exactly it, and that's what's so confusing about this situation. Is Fico genuinely worried about Slovakia's economy, or is he using this refugee crisis to make himself look good, strengthen his ties with Russia, and deflect blame for his government's own problems?
It seems like he's trying to do it all.
Yeah.
Appease Russia, keep the economy somewhat stable, all while these refugees suffer the consequences. But this isn't just an issue for Slovakia, is it? This has implications for the whole region, right?
Absolutely. What's happening in Slovakia has sent ripples throughout Europe. People are worried about the stability of the region, about the fragility of energy security, political alliances, and humanitarian aid.
Okay, so let's talk about those broader implications. How might this affect other European nations, especially those dealing with similar energy issues and the influx of Ukrainian refugees?
Well, if Slovakia goes through with this, it could set a dangerous precedent. Imagine other countries facing economic pressure doing the same thing, starting to use refugees as bargaining chips in their own political disputes.
Oh, that's a scary thought.
It could be catastrophic for millions of displaced people across Europe.
Yeah. It paints a pretty bleak picture of a world where compassion and solidarity are sacrificed for political convenience and self-interest. It's like This situation is a microcosm of all the biggest challenges we're facing today. Conflicts, energy crises, and millions of people displaced from their homes.
You're exactly right. What's happening in Slovakia reminds us that these global challenges are all connected, and we need solutions that address them together. Ignoring the plight of refugees won't make the energy crisis disappear, and increasing political tensions isn't going to magically solve economic problems.
Right. But this can feel so overwhelming for our listeners. They might be wondering, what does all of this have to do with me? How can a conflict in Slovakia and some political maneuvering affect their lives?
That's a really important question, and it gets to the heart of why we do these deep dives. It's easy to feel disconnected from global events, but the truth is, we're all part of a complex, interconnected system. What happens in Slovakia today can have ripple effects across the world tomorrow. This situation shows us why we need global awareness, why empathy is important, and why we need to hold our leaders accountable for their choices, especially when those choices impact the most vulnerable among us.
It's like you said before, we can't just be passive observers.
Yeah,
But it's not all bad news, right? There have to be some solutions, some hope in all of this.
there are, and we'll explore those next, along with some key takeaways from what we've discussed so far. But first, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What's resonated with you the most?
For me, it's the human impact. Over 130,000 refugees, each with their own story, hopes, dreams. And now they're facing this incredible uncertainty. It's hard to grasp how big this really is.
It is, and it underscores how important it is to remember the human element in all of this, to see beyond the numbers and recognize that these are real people, mothers, fathers, children. They deserve our compassion and support.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the politics and economics, but at the end of the day, this is about real people. Their lives are on the line.
Yeah.
So let's talk about solutions. Is there a way out of this? Can we help those 130,000 refugees?
Well, it's complicated, no easy fixes, but there are some options. Slovakia could try direct negotiations with Ukraine and Russia, see if they can find a compromise, maybe get that gas transit going again.
Like a restart.
Exactly. Maybe they could set up some way to compensate Slovakia for the lost revenue.
So everyone gives a little sad to get those pipelines working again? That sounds reasonable. What else?
Slovakia could also look for other gas suppliers.
Right, diversify.
They're already doing that, but it takes time, a lot of investment. The EU might be able to step in here, offer financial help, or help them make those energy partnerships.
The EU helping out a member state in need, that makes sense. What about directly supporting the refugees? Are there organizations on the ground in Slovakia providing aid?
Absolutely. Tons of humanitarian organizations are working in Slovakia right now, helping Ukrainian refugees. They need donations, volunteers, all that to keep going. So for our listeners, supporting those organizations is a really direct way to help.
Yeah, even if we can't change the political decisions, we can support the people doing the work, helping those affected. Any specific organizations you'd recommend?
Definitely. The UN Refugee Agency, the International Rescue Committee, the Slovakian Red Cross, they're all doing amazing work in Slovakia, providing food, shelter, medical care, even emotional support.
We'll put links to those organizations in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more or help out. But looking beyond individual actions, what about bigger solutions? How do we stop this from happening again?
That's the key question. This whole situation shows how risky it is to depend on just one energy supplier. Europe needs to prioritize energy independence, get their energy from more diverse sources, invest in renewables, strengthen partnerships with reliable suppliers, build a stronger energy infrastructure.
So basically, making sure no one country can hold another hostage over energy. Seems logical, but I bet it's harder to actually do.
You're right, it's complicated, lots of political and economic roadblocks. But the alternative, what's happening in Slovakia now, is energy insecurity leading to political instability, putting millions of people at risk.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think that's a powerful message. Energy security isn't just some abstract idea. It has real-world consequences, impacts everyday people. So as you go about your day, think about the energy you use, the choices you make. How are they connected to what's happening in the world?
Well said. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but awareness is the first step. Stay informed, have these important conversations, support organizations working to make a difference. We can all play a part in creating a more just and sustainable world.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and got you thinking. Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand these complex issues, the better prepared we are to face the challenges ahead.
It was a pleasure sharing these insights with you. Stay curious, stay engaged.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
That's all for today's update. The situation between Slovakia and Ukraine continues to evolve, and we'll be following it closely. What do you think? Should Slovakia prioritize its own needs or continue to support refugees? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth coverage on this and other global issues. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on In the Know News.